This week, I'd like to talk about a concept that if you don't understand it, then a lot of the New Covenant writings will be a little bit muddier, a little bit less clear. And that is the concept that we have in English as peace. When we read peace, we can instantly kind of think, well, I know what that's talking about. I know what it is to be at peace. But it's this Hebrew word which is important to understand. Just like with grace, it's the word chen that we needed to understand last week. The word is shalom. And it is the word shalom. It's not the word shalom. There is no sound in Hebrew to make shalom. So if we say Shabbat Shalom, it's a bit of a nonsense. It's kind of like an anglicized version. There's no English word shalom. What we're really attempting to do is to say the Hebrew word Shabbat Shalom. So the pronunciation would be according to the Hebrew, not according to our English sensibilities. But the word shalom, just like grace, you can see here is a noun. Also, you see it can be used as an adjective, but primarily it's a noun. It refers to the concept of shalom, what we would say in English as peace. Peace is, in English, also a noun, refers to a concept. But the English concept might lead us a little bit astray if we try to put the English concept of peace over every time the Bible uses shalom or the Greek translation of shalom. You say bear. If every time you see the word you say bear, you put peace, then you've gone from the Hebrew concept to the Greek concept to the English concept. So you're actually quite a ways away from the original concept of shalom. In Hebrew, all nouns will have a verb root. And in this case, it is this word, which is shalam. We see it says here completeness, soundness, welfare, peace. And none of these words entirely encapsulate shalom. Shalom, as we will see, is a state of things being kind of in unity. If we can understand the verb root shalam, then we will understand more what shalom refers to. But first step, we just need to acknowledge that peace is not the entire concept. There are kind of little flavors of peace within it, but that word doesn't entirely translate shalom. So the word shalom, so if we can understand the word shalam, it will tell us more about what shalom is. You'll notice down here in the Strong's definition, you have a reference to making complete and paying, repaying, to finish, to make full. Give again, words like that. So it's to do with restitution. It's, if you can think of it in terms like to make something whole. So if somebody pays you something and you repay them, then you have kind of made them whole again, we would say in English. You have made them complete. Where there was something that was lacking, you have made them complete. And if we look to when this word is used in the scriptures, it might interest you where it's used in some of the verses in the Torah. In Exodus 21:33-36, it says, "When a man opens a pit, or if a man digs a pit, does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey has fallen into it, the owner of the pit is to repay. He is to give silver to the owner, and the dead animal is his." But it's translated as repay there, which is not a bad translation to get across what it is saying, but the word shalam is used, and if we can understand that the word shalam is used, then we get an understanding of what it is to shalam, is to make something whole again, to restore something. Obviously, we know that Yahovah, God restores us. He brings us, He shalams us, and brings us to this state of, but fine translation, I was going to say bad translation, of peace. It's fine, but it's not complete. Ironically, He brings us to the state of shalom would be a better way to understand it. "And when the ox of a man smites the ox of his neighbour and it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the silver from it, and also divide the dead ox," or just the dead is what it says. "Or if it was known that the ox was previously in the habit of goring, and its owner has not kept it confined, he shall certainly repay." We have in English, but in Hebrew, it's a Hebrew parallelism where the same word is used twice to kind of emphasize it. He shall shalam, ox for ox. So just like you shall certainly die is you shall moot. Some translations have it as dying you shall die, but it's certainly die often. Here we have certainly repay, but it's shalam. But again, we've got this idea of something being wrong, something kind of being out of balance. The person's ox has gored another, and there's some kind of problem that needs to be restored. The verb that would be done in that situation, what Yahovah seeks to be done in that situation, is shalam, to bring the situation, if you like, to a state of shalom. In Exodus 22:4-5 it says, "If the theft is indeed found alive in his hand, whether it is an ox or a donkey or sheep, he shalam, double." Okay, so translated repay. "When a man lets a field or vineyard be grazed bare, and lets loose his livestock, and it feeds in another man's field, he shalam from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard." So in order to make a restoration in this situation that's described here, the person who is at fault would need to take of the best that they have in order to make restoration in the situation. But the idea of making restoration is to shalam. So in seeing how this word is used, we're getting a better idea of what it is to be brought to a state of shalom. when we talk about Yahovah bringing us peace, that is what we're talking about. We're talking about him shalam in our lives. Him bringing us to a state of completeness, a state of wellness, a state of restoration. Leviticus 5:14-16 says, "And Yahovah spoke to Moshe, saying, When a soul commits a trespass and has sinned by mistake against the holy set-apart matters, holy or set-apart matters of Yahovah, then he shall bring to Yahovah as his guilt offering a ram, a perfect one from the flock," just like the guy restoring from the best that he has, "with your valuation in shekels of silver, according to the shekel of the holy or set-apart place, as a guilt offering. And he shall make good for the sin that he has done in sinning against the holy or set-apart matters of Yahovah." So it might be treating that which is holy as if it is common. So a sin such as that. In such a situation, Yahovah has provided a way to shalam, to make the situation right, to bring the situation back to how it should be, a state of shalom. For the sin that is done against that which is holy or set apart, and shall add 1/5 to it, and give it to the priest, and the priest shall make atonement for him with the ram of the guilt offering, and it shall be forgiven him. So the idea of making atonement, making one clean after there's been some kind of transgression, we know from previous studies that that is done with offerings. It's interesting to me that the way that one would shalam in this situation is not by the peace offering. They are called the shlamim, which is the plural of shalom. The shlamim, you would think, to make peace, you would give a peace offering, but that's not how it's done. In order to shalam in this situation, one brings a guilt offering. So there are ways to bring shalom to the situation, to make the situation right, which are prescribed by Yahovah. So to bring shalom to one's life, one would do all of the things that Yahovah prescribes in his Torah, to do what is good, what is right in his eyes. That brings shalom. Here, the thing that he tells one to do is to bring the guilt offering and to add 1/5 to whatever it was that you've sinned against, that was made holy to Yahovah, and you've come along and defiled it in some way. You add 1/5 to it, and you give a guilt offering, and that will shalam in the situation, thus bringing shalom. In Deuteronomy 7:9-10 it says, "And you shall know the Yahovah your Elohim. He is Elohim, the trustworthy El, guarding covenant and kindness for 1,000 generations with those who love him and those who guard his commands, or cherish his commands, shamar his commands. But repaying those who hate him to their face to destroy them. He does not delay to do so with him who hates him. He shalams him to his face." And we've seen that those who hate Yahovah, pretend or feign obedience to him. So it's not a case of saying, oh, I love him in my heart, I feel well towards him. That's not loving him. And neither is it to think badly of him in your heart, to hate him. But we see the word shalam used again. So he doesn't just shalam those who do well by him, do right in his eyes. He also shalams those who do evil, and their punishment is actually bringing things to a state of shalom overall. So he will bring shalom to those who do good, and he will also bring shalom to those who do bad. But those who do bad will not necessarily like what it is to be at shalom. When you make a vow to Yahovah your Elohim, do not delay to shalam. You've made a vow, you kind of set things out of balance. There's something to be paid to bring things into restoration, to bring things to a state of completeness. So paying your vow is to shalam your vow. We see something interesting in the book of Job. It says, wise in heart and mighty in strength, who has hardened himself against him and is shalam. So the verb is used there. Again, if we say at peace, it kind of explains some of it, but really we need to understand what the Hebrew says to understand what is being said here. Who has hardened himself against Yahovah? Who knows that Yahovah said to do something or not to do something, and they've hardened themselves against him and said, no, I will continue in the way that I decide to, and is shalam, or is in a state of shalom, one could say. One can think oneself to be in a state of peace or shalom when one is rebelling against Yahovah. We see in Deuteronomy 29 that they bless themselves and say that they will have peace or shalom in their heart. That's how the rebellious are. So they might well be at peace with how they're acting, but they're not in a state of shalom as Yahovah sees it, and indeed he will shalam to their face. The word tamim is closely related to this. So we've seen this word a lot. Complete, whole, entire, sound. And when I say that they're related, I don't mean linguistically. I mean conceptually. So to be tamim before him, to be blemishless or perfect, as it sometimes is translated, is not to never do anything wrong in one's life. It is rather to retain one's blemishless state before him, for that to be your intention. If you happen to transgress, as you likely will, in trying to become tamim before him, then that doesn't mean that you're not tamim. That because your intention was to be tamim. You know what his word says. Your intention is to do it flawlessly. If you stumble in that, it doesn't mean that you're not tamim. But this is conceptually related. So to be in a state of shalom is kind of like what it is like to be tamim before him. So morally, you can be tamim, you can be complete or whole in regards to what he asks of you. And if one is tamim morally before him, then one will be in a state of shalom. Shalom is kind of like a broader idea of tamim. It's kind of like the state of affairs is tamim when there is shalom. But if one is rebellious to Yahovah, one can give oneself shalom in one's heart, but one would not be tamim before Yahovah, and one would not be considered by Yahovah to be in a state of shalom. And really, it doesn't matter if we think that we're at peace. What matters is whether he thinks that we are at peace. I think a good illustration of the idea of shalom is the picture that I've used for the thumbnail. This idea of all of the individual strands coming together into what might be a rope or into a thicker cord is a good illustration of it. To be at shalom is kind of to have all of the components of one's life integrated with one another. And the way to achieve that is not to do it according to how you think it should be done, but to do it according to how Yahovah thinks it should be done. Because you might think, oh, things are great. I've got peace, I've got shalom. When actually Yahovah looks at you and says, you know what? You really don't. You have deluded yourself in some way. And that word that I used, integrated, really gets across the concept. Okay, integrated. The idea of everything working together, various parts being linked or coordinated. This idea of integration really gets across what it is, although if we had Yeshua as saying integration unto you, really wouldn't get across the idea as much as the word peace leads people astray. Unless you understand the concept of shalom, having it translated as integration really wouldn't help. We see in Ephesians 6, it talks about the gospel, or the good news, and it calls it the good news of peace. The good news of, in Greek you say bear, but what it's referring to is this concept of shalom. It's translated into Greek and it loses a lot of what it was originally. Then when we translate it into English from Greek, it loses even more of what it was originally. So the gospel of peace sounds lovely, sounds kind of nice, but really it doesn't get across to us what it is that Yahovah is offering to us, which is integration. It is shalom. This is a phrase that Peter uses in the book of Acts. he says, bringing the gospel, peace through Yeshua Messiah. And again, when you kind of read that and you're not familiar with the term shalom, it can kind of sound a bit flowery, a bit like, oh, peace and hugs to everyone. But that's really not what it's saying. What is brought through Yeshua, through his blood, through the cleansing from our sin, is a return to shalom. So this is shalom through Yeshua Messiah. We have these things recorded for us in Greek, but we see Yeshua, for one, spoke to Paul in the Hebrew language. The language that they spoke was Hebrew. Peter was, in all likelihood, not speaking Greek here, and even if he was speaking Greek, since he was with the Gentiles, even if he was speaking Greek, he was using the closest word to the Hebrew word. Again, there isn't a one word that encapsulates shalom in Greek, just as there isn't in English. So the gospel, bringing the gospel to you, is shalom through Yeshua Messiah. Romans 10, verse 15, we see the good news of shalom mentioned again. We see Paul says here, as it has been written. So that tells us he is getting this from somewhere in the scriptures that he had. And where this actually comes from is Isaiah 52. In the Masoretic text, it says, how pleasant upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, or the gospel, who proclaims shalom, and it's the Hebrew word shalom which is used there. Now, if we look in the Septuagint, it says gospel of peace, glad tidings of peace, or good news of peace. The word gospel of peace there, same phrase as is used in the New Testament verses that we looked at. We see Yeshua use this word, that he is recorded using the word Eusebeia, of course, in the New Covenant writings. But we we have some familiarity with the idea that he said, peace be unto you. And if we understand the concept of shalom, then we understand better what he is wishing upon people. Shalom be unto you, this condition of completeness or wellness or restoration or being whole. He says, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. If we understand it, shalom. Shalom I leave with you, my shalom I give to you. I do not give you as the world gives. Do not let your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. In Luke 24:36, we see what is usually translated as peace be unto you. As they were saying this, Yeshua himself stood in the midst of them and said to them, peace to you. But again, it's shalom to you, that he is wishing them to much deeper than him saying, peace man, or whatever idea people have in their heads. John 20:19-22 says, recording the same events, it says, and therefore it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and when the doors were shut, where the disciples met for fear of the Jews, Yeshua came and stood in the midst and said to them, shalom to you. And having said this, he showed them his hands and his side. The disciples therefore rejoiced when they saw the Master. Then Yeshua said to them again, Shalom to you. And it's much deeper what he is wishing to them than just peace. As the Father has sent me, I also send you. And having said this, he breathed on them and said to them, receive the set-apart Spirit. So notice, Shalom to you. And it says, having said this, he showed them his hands and his side. So the fact that he had said, Shalom to you, is important. Then it says that he said to them again. So emphasis is put upon this. Peace to you. Having said this phrase, Shalom to you, he breathed on them and said, receive the set apart or the Holy Spirit. So a special emphasis is put upon the idea of him wishing to them shalom. And if we just think he said peace, then it's kind of like, well, why is this important? And you could make a big deal of it and go off the English word. But if we understand that he is wishing shalom, wellness, wholeness, completeness to them, then he shows them his hands and his side, where he was pierced with the spear, presumably. And when he says to them, Shalom be with you, and then having said that, he gave them the holy or the set-apart Spirit. Things like this take on a clearer significance as to what exactly is going on. He is giving to them, if you like, a state of shalom, which comes from them seeing his wounds, and then them rejoicing when they see the Master, and them receiving the Spirit, all of which give them shalom. John 20, verse 26 says, and after 8 days his disciples were again inside, and Thomas with them. Yeshua came, the doors having been shut, and he stood in the midst, and again he says to them, Shalom to you. In Isaiah 9 verse 6, we see Yeshua being called Prince of Shalom, Prince of Peace. Just sounds like a nice title in English. In Hebrew it is Sar Shalom. So Yeshua is Prince of Shalom. So if we can see this concept for what it is, then we can see the things that are written in the New Covenant writings in a new light. What Yeshua was saying to them would bring them shalom. We also see that Paul uses the word often. To all who are in Rome, beloved of God, called holy ones or set apart ones, favor or grace, chen, to you, and shalom from God. If we don't understand the word, where it comes from, then it's just kind of like a flowery nonsense. Peace from God unto you. It just kind of sounds a bit lovely and doesn't really have any substance. And if that's how we understand the word peace, then that's what we get when it's used. Paul sometimes begins, as you see here, his letters with wishes of shalom, and he always ends his letters by wishing shalom to the people. After admonishing them for their various transgressions, he wishes shalom to them. So if we understand shalom and we wish shalom to somebody, it's saying something a lot deeper, that they would come to a state of shalom before Yahovah. So Paul is can be interpreted as he is summing up everything he said in his letters by wishing shalom upon them. We see in 1 Corinthians 14 verse 33 it says, God is not God, often translated of confusion, but of peace. So if we can understand what shalom is, then we would expect this word here translated as disorder, sometimes as confusion, to be the opposite of shalom. If shalom is to be integrated, then this word should be disintegration. And if we look at this word, instability, a state of disorder, disturbance, or confusion. Often people will say, when they're confused about something in the word, they'll say, no, that's not right. God is not God of confusion. Thinking perhaps that it means that they will never be confused about anything to do with God. But that's not what it's saying. It's saying he's not a God of disorder, of disintegration. Instead, he is a God of shalom. And that is the state that we are brought to when we repent and we begin to walk in his ways. In Numbers 6, it says, Yahovah bless you and keep you. Yahovah make his face shine upon you and show chen to you. Yahovah lift up his face upon you and give you shalom. So this is actually how Yahovah tells Aaron and his sons to bless the people. And actually in the next verse he says, thus you shall put my name upon the people. So Yahovah's name is not Yahovah, just what he's called. It's also his character, his nature. So it's interesting that in saying Yahovah give you shalom, that is how he wishes for his name to be put upon people, because it is his name to give forgiveness to those who repent of sin. It's his name to bring people into a state of shalom, who will love him and will turn to him, who will enter into covenant with him and be in a covenant of peace. He is the side of the covenant that has the power to do things like that in the lives of those in covenant with him. He can bring shalom. He can protect us. He can lead us through life. Because he is that side of the covenant where he expects from us is that we would submit to him and that we would do the things that he finds pleasing. And if we will do that, he will bring shalom upon us, because that is his name. Jeremiah 29:10-13 says, for thus said Yahovah, when 70 years are completed at Babylon, I shall visit you and establish my good word toward you to bring you back to this place. So this is when the Jews were in exile in Babylon. For I know the plans that I am planning for you, declares Yahovah, plans of shalom and not of Ra, of evil. Find translation for the purposes of this, to give you a future and an expectancy. So Ra is when things are not fulfilling their potential, when things are not in a state of shalom, they're not how they should be. People often misuse this verse. They will send it to people when they're having a hard time or whatever, when actually it's a prophecy that was given through Jeremiah that their exile in Babylon was not the ultimate end for them, that he has plans of shalom, and he would bring them back to the land, just as we are exiled among the nations at the moment, but we will all be brought to the land of Israel in the kingdom, because he has plans of shalom for us also. Then you shall call on me, and shall come and pray to me, and I shall listen to you. And you shall seek me, and shall find when you search for me with all your heart. So as we saw last week, if you turn your ear from hearing the Torah, even your prayer will be an abomination. Not if people didn't know what the Torah was, that their prayer is an abomination, but turning your ear from hearing it is quite another matter. Yahovah wishes to bring us to a state of shalom, but if we will turn our ear from the very thing that is supposed to bring that state of shalom, then what is Yahovah to do? So if we seek him, truly we seek him who he is, and not some false god that has been put in his place, then he has plans to bring shalom in our lives. In 2 Corinthians 13 verse 11 it says, "For the rest, brothers, rejoice, be made perfect, be made tamim, whole, complete, sound. Be encouraged, be of one mind, live in shalom, and the Elohim of love and shalom shall be with you." Again, if we don't understand what shalom is, then this verse can kind of sound like a trite platitude, which doesn't at all accord with who Paul is. It's saying live in shalom, which is done how? By doing the Torah, by following his instructions. And the God of love and shalom shall be with you. If you follow his instructions, you walk correctly before him, you don't turn your ear from hearing the bits that you don't like, he will bring shalom in your life, because he is a God of love and of shalom. Romans 9, 6-7 says, "For the mind of the flesh is death, but the mind of the spirit is life and shalom," which gives us a much more complete picture of what is being said here. Life accords with the idea of shalom in a way that it doesn't accord with the idea of peace. He brings about abundance. He brings about the way things are supposed to be. He brings life into the situation. He brings a state of shalom. Because the mind of the flesh is enmity towards Elohim, for it does not subject itself to the Torah of Elohim, neither indeed is it able. So if you find yourself unable to subject yourself to the Torah of God, Paul says that is because you are going after the mind of the flesh. and that is death. That will lead you to death, rebellion, and death, ultimately the death of one's soul. The mind of the Spirit is contrasted with that. That is to be subject to the Torah of God, and that is life and shalom. So if you want life in shalom rather than death, that's how you do it. You subject yourself to God's commandments, and they will bring blessing and abundance in your life, whether that's financial or not. Jeremiah 6:13-14 says, "For from the least of them even to the greatest of them, they are all greedy for gain, and from the prophet even to the priest, all act falsely. And they heal the breach of my people, saying," in English, "peace, peace," when there is no peace. But the words used in Hebrew are shalom, shalom, when there is no shalom. So there are people who will promise you shalom. They will speak all these great words about Jesus and about how he will bring peace into your life. And none of it is actually founded on anything real. And none of it has any substance. But if you understand the concept of shalom, then you can understand that what they're promising, as said here, they're promising shalom, or they're saying that things are in a state of shalom, when in fact there is no shalom. Isaiah 57:18-21 says, "I've seen his ways, but now I heal him." This is Yahovah. "And I lead him, and shalam comforts to him and to his mourners." Okay, so Yahovah is describing a state of shalom here. He will heal us, and he will lead us, creating the fruit of the lips. "Peace, peace to him who is far off," or shalom, shalom to him who is far off, "and to him who is near," says Yahovah, "and I shall heal him." So there are people who will promise shalom and say shalom, shalom, when there is no shalom. But Yahovah says, "Come to me, and I will bring you shalom." But the wrong are like the troubled sea, for it is unable to rest, and its waters cast up mud and dirt. There is no shalom, said my Elohim, for the Rasah. So the Rasah are promised shalom by those who would lead them astray. If you're told you're in a state of peace with God, but you haven't come into submission to his instructions, then that is deceit. You are being led astray. There is no shalom to people who will not bend the knee to Yahovah and follow him where he leads. But to him who comes to him earnestly, genuinely, then Yahovah brings shalom in their lives. Yahovah is the only one who can do so, although whoever can promise shalom and can speak about peace and love and make it all sound lovely, when in fact what they're telling you, what they're teaching you, is the opposite of what will bring shalom. Such people will be shalam by Yahovah. He will shalam them to their face, because he will repay what is in their heart, which is a desire to disobey him. They can say with their mouths that they want to follow Yahovah, that he's the God of love and peace and all the rest of it, but really have just completely missed what Yahovah is actually promising, miss the actual peace or the actual shalom that Yahovah wishes to bring in their lives, and will stubbornly turn their ears from hearing what Yahovah actually has to say, and will listen to the people who are kind of telling them a lovely story that accords with what they might read in their English translations in their Bible, and not go back and understand what these concepts were from the beginning of the Bible. Psalm 50 verse 16 says, "But to the Rasah, those who have no shalom, God said, what right have you to recite my laws or take my covenant in your mouth?" So they have no shalom, because Yahovah's laws, his covenant of peace, is what brings shalom. And they can say that they're in covenant with Yahovah, but Yahovah says, essentially, how dare you say that you're in covenant with me and not be submitted to me. Yahovah willing, I'll see you next week.